moment I entered the courtroom, my mother scornfully glared, and my father averted his eyes. Abruptly, the judge paused, leaning in closely and whispering, "Hold on, Ice, is that genuinely her?" The whole chamber went completely silent. They possessed no inkling of my identity until, "Don't you dare embarrass us today, Anna," my mother hissed, her voice cutting through the hushed grandeur of the courthouse lobby. "Just stay quiet and let the real lawyers handle this." My father wouldn't even look at me, his eyes fixed somewhere in the distance, as if I was a shameful stain he couldn't bear to acknowledge. Nothing new there. They thought they knew me, thought I was still the family disappointment, the dropout, the failure they'd spent a lifetime pretending didn't exist. But little did they know, by the end of that day, they'd be the ones truly shamed. And that was just the twisted beginning of a story that would unravel a family murder. My name is Anna, and I'm 31 years old. For most of my life, I've been the invisible one, the black sheep my parents conveniently forgot about when relatives asked after their children. We were at the courthouse in Omaha, Nebraska, because my parents, Helen and Robert Thompson, were trying to evict their tenant, a woman named Claire. Her crime? The audacity to ask for repairs before paying rent on a building that was literally falling apart. My parents owned 3 rental properties, all inherited from my grandfather. They ran them like a personal kingdom, collecting tribute without a thought for their subjects. Claire had lived in one of their apartments for 2 years, always paying on time, until the ceiling started leaking, and black mold, actual black mold, appeared in her daughter's bedroom. She'd withheld rent, demanding the repairs be done first. My parents' response? An eviction notice. She signed a contract. My mother had ranted at my sister Melissa over the phone just 2 weeks prior. She doesn't get to just stop paying because she's picky about a little moisture. A little moisture. That's what she called black mold. I'd heard about the case casually from Melissa, who, at 28, still lived under their suffocating control. She had no idea that I'd spent the last 7 years clawing my way through law school, working 3 jobs, sleeping in my car more times than I could count, and finally, passing the bar exam. I did it all alone, without a single dollar or word of encouragement from them. They didn't even know I'd gone to college, let alone become an attorney. The day I'd walked out of their house at 19, my father had thrown my belongings onto the front lawn like trash. "You're nothing!" he'd screamed, his face contorted. "You'll never amount to anything without us." My mother had stood in the doorway, arms crossed, cold as ice. "Don't come crawling back when you fail, Anna." But I hadn't. Not when I was sleeping in my beat-up car behind a grocery store, surviving on vending machine snacks. Not when I was so utterly exhausted from overnight shifts I could barely stay awake in class. I didn't ask them for help. I'd rather starve than swallow my pride and beg from people who'd made it brutally clear I was worthless. Now, as we walked toward the courtroom, I watched my mother smooth down her expensive blouse and adjust her pearls, always more concerned with appearances than reality. My father strode beside her in his tailored suit, the picture of respectability. They told everyone at their country club they had only one daughter, Melissa, the obedient one who worked as a receptionist and let them control her every move. "I don't know why you even came," my mother muttered, her voice barely a whisper as we approached the courtroom doors. "This doesn't concern you." I just smiled, a small, knowing curve of my lips, but said nothing. Let them think I was just here to watch. Let them think I was still the broken girl they'd thrown away. Inside, the air was thick with tension, heavy with unspoken fears. Claire sat at the defendant's table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She was a small woman in her 40s, wearing a dress that had seen better days. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and I could see the exhaustion etched into every line of her face. This wasn't just about an apartment to her. It was about keeping a roof over her daughter's head. It was everything. My parents took their seats on the plaintiff's side. My mother gestured imperiously for me to sit in the gallery behind them. But I walked past her, ignoring the silent command, and headed straight toward Claire's table. I could feel my mother's eyes burning into my back, could practically hear her mind racing, scrambling to figure out what I was doing. "Excuse me," I said quietly to Claire, my voice calm. "I'm your attorney." Her eyes widened, brimming with disbelief. I couldn't afford an attorney. I was going to represent myself." "Consider this pro bono," I replied, setting my briefcase down with a soft thud. "I've reviewed your case. You have every right to withhold rent until those repairs are made." Your landlords violated the implied warranty of habitability. Behind me, I heard my mother's sharp, sudden intake of breath. Then my father's voice, low and absolutely furious. What the hell do you think you're doing, Anna? I turned to face them, and for the first time in 12 years, I looked my parents directly in the eye. I'm doing my job. My mother's face had gone pale, then blotchy red. You can't be serious. You're not a lawyer. Actually, I am. I pulled out my bar card, the crisp plastic feeling like a badge of honor, and held it up for them to see. I passed the bar exam 2 years ago. I've been working at a firm downtown, mostly handling tenant rights cases. This is exactly my area of expertise. My father stood up, his hands clenched into fists, his expensive suit straining. This is ridiculous. You dropped out of community college. You're a homeless bum we threw out for being a waste of space. I was homeless for a while, yes, I said calmly, letting the words hang in the air, a silent accusation. Thanks to you. But I worked my way through school. I graduated from college, then law school. I did it all without a single cent from you. The judge entered before my father could respond, and everyone scrambled to their seats. Judge Patricia Holbrook was in her 60s, with steel gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor that made even experienced attorneys nervous. She looked over the courtroom, her eyes settling on me with a flicker of recognition. Counsel, please approach, she said. I walked up to the bench, and my parents' attorney, a man named Gerald who charged $500 an hour, joined me. Judge Holbrook looked between us, then down at the papers in front of her. I see we have representation for the defendant now, she stated. Counselor Anna Thompson, Your Honor, I said, my voice steady. I'm representing Claire Mitchell in this matter. Judge Holbrook's eyebrows rose slightly. Anna Thompson. I thought that name looked familiar. Didn't you argue the Riverside Apartments case last year? Yes, Your Honor. You won that case, if I recall. The tenants got everything they asked for. Repairs, rent reimbursement, and damages. That's correct, Your Honor. She looked at my parents, then back at me, and something shifted in her expression. A slight tightening around her mouth, a subtle glint in her eyes. This should be interesting. Let's proceed. As I walked back to my table, I caught my mother's expression, pure horror mixed with disbelief. My father looked like he'd been slapped, the blood drained from his face. Melissa, sitting behind them, had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide and shocked. I sat down next to Claire, who was staring at me like I'd just walked on water. Thank you, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. I don't know how to thank you. Just tell the truth when you're asked questions, I said, a small reassuring smile for her. That's all you need to do. Gerald stood up first, presenting my parents' case. He painted Claire as a difficult tenant looking for excuses not to pay rent, making mountains out of molehills regarding minor maintenance issues. He showed photos of the apartment taken years ago, pristine and clean. The plaintiffs have always maintained their properties to the highest standards, Gerald said smoothly, his voice dripping with practiced charm. They're responsible landlords who simply want what they're owed, the rent that was agreed upon in a legally binding contract. When it was my turn, I stood and walked to the evidence table. I'd spent the last 2 weeks gathering everything I needed. Photos of the actively leaking ceiling, the sprawling black mold, the broken windows that wouldn't close properly. Medical records showing that Claire's daughter had developed alarming respiratory problems. Maintenance requests that had been ignored for months. And a city inspector's report that condemned parts of the building as uninhabitable. Your Honor, I said, my voice calm but firm, laying out the evidence piece by piece. The defendant didn't withhold rent out of spite or convenience. She withheld it because the apartment she was paying for had become a health hazard. Nebraska law is clear. Landlords must maintain properties in a condition fit for human habitation. When they fail to do so, tenants have the legal right to withhold rent until repairs are made. I walked the judge through every violation, every ignored request, every broken promise. My parents had collected rent for months while knowing the building was falling apart around Claire and her child. They'd threatened Claire when she complained, told her she could leave if she didn't like it, fully aware that she couldn't afford to break her lease and move somewhere else. This isn't about a difficult tenant, I stated, my voice gaining strength. This is about landlords who saw their tenants as nothing more than a revenue stream, who cared more about collecting money than ensuring the people living in their buildings were safe. Judge Holbrook listened intently, making notes, asking pointed questions. When I showed her the medical records for Claire's daughter, I saw her jaw tighten. "Counselor," she said to Gerald, her voice sharp, "did your clients know about the mold?" Gerald shuffled his papers nervously. They were aware of some moisture issues, but did they know about the mold? She repeated, cutting him off. "Yes, Your Honor," he conceded, "but they dispute that it was as severe as the tenant claims. The city inspector's report says otherwise." Judge Holbrook looked at my parents, her expression one of barely concealed disgust. "In fact, it says the entire unit should have been vacated months ago." My mother opened her mouth to speak, but my father grabbed her arm, stopping her cold. Judge Holbrook turned back to me. "Continue, Counselor." I presented the rest of my evidence, building the case brick by brick. By the time I finished, there was no doubt in anyone's mind that my parents had been negligent landlords at best, and criminally negligent at worst. They'd put a child's health at risk for the sake of collecting around $200 a month. "Your Honor," I said in closing, my voice resonating through the courtroom, "my client isn't asking for much. She's asking for what she's legally entitled to, a safe place to live. She's asking for repairs to be made, for the conditions that forced her to withhold rent to be remedied. And she's asking for reimbursement for the medical expenses her daughter incurred as a direct result of living in an unsafe environment." I sat down, and Claire reached over to squeeze my hand. Her eyes were filled with tears, but they were tears of relief, not despair. Judge Holbrook looked at my parents for a long, silent moment. "I'll be honest with you," she said, her voice stern. "I've seen a lot of landlord-tenant disputes in my years on the bench, but this is one of the more egregious cases I've encountered." My mother's face had gone from red to ghastly white. My father looked like he wanted to sink into the floor and disappear. "I'm ruling in favor of the defendant," Judge Holbrook continued, her words a thunderclap. "Not only will the eviction be dismissed, but the plaintiffs will be required to make all necessary repairs within 30 days. Additionally, they will reimburse the defendant for 3 months of rent and all medical expenses related to her daughter's respiratory issues. And just so we're clear," she added, her gaze fixed on my parents, "if these repairs aren't completed to code within the specified time frame, I will personally refer this case to the city for further action." She banged her gavel, a sound of absolute finality, and it was over. Claire broke down sobbing, thanking me over and over. I helped her gather her things, walking her out of the courtroom while she clung to my arm like I was her lifeline. Behind us, I could hear my parents arguing with Gerald in hushed, furious voices. Outside the courtroom, Claire hugged me tightly, her gratitude a tangible thing. "You saved us," she choked out. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't have to," I said, a genuine warmth spreading through me. "Just take care of your daughter." She left, still crying, and I stood there for a moment, letting the weight of what had just happened settle over me. 12 years. 12 years of being told I was worthless, of being treated like I didn't exist, of fighting every single day to prove that I was more than what they said I was. And now, in one afternoon, I'd proven them wrong in the most public way possible. I was gathering my things when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to find my mother standing there, her face contorted with pure, unadulterated rage. "How dare you?" she spat, venom lacing every syllable. "How dare you humiliate us like that?" "I did my job," I said calmly, my voice steady despite the storm in her eyes. "Your job?" she shrieked, her voice rising. "You call destroying your own family your job?" "You're not my family," I stated, the words coming out flat, emotionless but firm. "You stopped being my family the day you threw me out with nothing." My father appeared beside her, his face purple with anger, his expensive suit rumpled with fury. "You ungrateful little—" "I'm not the one who should be ashamed here," I cut him off, my voice sharp now. "You put a child's health at risk because you were too cheap to fix a leaking roof. You're lucky Judge Holbrook didn't refer you for criminal charges. We raised you," my mother cried, her voice breaking dramatically. "We gave you everything." I laughed then, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed in the empty hallway. "You gave me nothing. Everything I have, I earned on my own. And you know what? I'm glad you threw me out because it taught me exactly who you are. People who care more about money and appearances than about doing what's right." I walked past them, my head held high, leaving them standing there in their expensive clothes, their shattered pride scattered on the marble floor. But even as I walked away, a cold knot of certainty tightened in my gut. This wasn't over. My mother never let anything go, and neither did my father. This was just the first shot fired. I drove back to my office in a daze, replaying the entire scene in my head. The look on Judge Holbrook's face when she recognized me, the horror in my parents' eyes when they realized I wasn't the failure they'd convinced themselves I was, the profound gratitude in Claire's voice. It all felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold. The firm I worked for, Kestrel and Associates, was located in a renovated warehouse downtown. It wasn't fancy, exposed brick walls, secondhand furniture, mismatched coffee mugs in the break room, but it was home. The senior partner, Diane Kestrel, had given me my first real break after I passed the bar exam. She'd seen something in me during the interview, something that made her willing to take a chance on a woman with no connections and a resume that, frankly, could have listed lived in a car as a gap year experience. I'd been working there for 2 years, taking on cases bigger firms wouldn't touch. Tenant rights, workers' compensation, disability claims, the kind of law that didn't make anyone rich, but helped people who desperately needed it. Diane always said we were in the business of leveling playing fields, and I believed her. This job had given me purpose, had shown me that everything I'd suffered through had been worth it if I could use it to help others. When I walked into the office, Diane was waiting in the conference room. She waved me over, and I could tell from her expression that she'd heard about the courtroom victory. Word traveled fast in legal circles, especially for a case involving prominent local landlords. "You did good work today, Anna," she said as I sat down. Claire called me right after court. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her, but she wanted me to know what you did for her. "I just presented the facts," I said, downplaying it. "No," Diane shook her head gently. "You gave her hope. You showed her that the system could work, that people like her don't have to just accept being trampled on." "That's not nothing, Anna." I felt my throat tighten, a lump forming there. "Thank you." I paused, then continued. "But we need to talk about something else." Diane's expression grew serious, intuitive as always. "Your parents. They're not going to let this go, are they?" "No," I admitted, the cold knot in my stomach returning. "They're not. Do you think they'll retaliate?" "I know they will," I stated, the certainty chilling. I thought about the hate in my mother's eyes, the pure rage and humiliation. They'll try to discredit me, try to ruin my reputation. They have money and connections. They'll use both. Diane was quiet for a moment, her gaze thoughtful. "We'll deal with it when it comes. But Anna, you need to be prepared. People like your parents, when they feel cornered, they can be dangerous. Not physically necessarily, but they'll go after everything you've built." "I know," I said, a deep resolve settling over me. "But I couldn't just stand by and watch them hurt people. Not anymore." "I understand," she said, a flicker of admiration in her eyes. "And for what it's worth, I'm proud of you. What you did today took courage." After Diane left, I sat in the conference room alone, staring out the window at the Omaha skyline. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of orange and gold. It was beautiful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that a storm was coming. My phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. "Mom and Dad are furious. They're talking about suing you. Please be careful." I didn't respond. What was there to say? Of course they were furious. Of course they wanted revenge. That's who they were. People who couldn't stand to be challenged, who would rather destroy someone than admit they were wrong. But I'd faced worse than their anger. I'd survived homelessness, poverty, and years of their emotional abuse. Whatever they threw at me now, I told myself I could handle it. At least that's what I told myself. As I packed up my things to leave, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something, a gut feeling, made me pick up. "Anna Thompson?" a man's voice asked. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Henry Bradford. I was your grandfather's attorney. I need to speak with you about something urgent, something your parents don't know about." My heart started racing, a sudden frantic drum in my chest. "What is it?" "Not over the phone. Can you meet me tomorrow morning?" 9 a.m. at my office. "Yes," I heard myself say, the word a little breathless. "I'll be there." He gave me the address and hung up. I stood there holding my phone, my mind spinning. What could my grandfather's attorney want after all these years? My grandfather had died 12 years ago. His estate settled and distributed. What could possibly be urgent now? I had a feeling I was about to find out, and something told me it was going to change everything. Henry Bradford's office was in an old building downtown, the kind with marble floors and brass fixtures that had been there since the 1920s. I arrived at 9 a.m. sharp, my stomach churning with anticipation. The receptionist led me to a corner office where Henry sat behind a massive oak desk, surrounded by file cabinets and leather-bound law books. He was in his 70s with wisps of white hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He stood when I entered, extending his hand. "Anna, thank you for coming on such short notice." "You said it was urgent," I replied, shaking his hand, my voice tight with nerves. "What's this about?" He gestured for me to sit, and then, with deliberate slowness, pulled out a thick, official-looking folder from his desk drawer. "I've been your grandfather's attorney for 40 years. When he died, I handled his estate according to his wishes. But there was one provision in his will that was kept sealed. A provision that could only be opened under specific conditions." My pulse quickened, a frantic flutter. "What kind of provision?" "Your grandfather loved you very much, Anna," Henry said softly, his kind eyes looking into mine. "He saw how your parents treated you, and it broke his heart. So he made arrangements to protect you." Henry opened the folder and slid a document across the desk. "He established a trust fund in your name. $50,000 to be released when you turned 30 or when you obtained a professional degree, whichever came first." I stared at the document, unable to speak. $50,000? It was more money than I'd ever had, more than I'd ever imagined having. "You passed the bar exam 2 years ago," Henry continued, a gentle smile playing on his lips. "That met the conditions. The money has been sitting in trust, accumulating interest. It's now worth nearly $60,000. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" My voice came out as a whisper, raw with emotion. "Your grandfather's instructions were explicit. The trust was to remain completely confidential until you met the conditions. He didn't want your parents to know about it. Didn't want them to interfere or try to claim it for themselves. He knew them too well. I thought about my grandfather, the quiet man who'd always had a kind word for me when my parents didn't. He'd been the only one who truly believed I could be something more than what my parents said I was. He had truly seen me. "There's something else," Henry said, pulling out a sealed yellowed envelope. "Your grandfather wrote you a letter. He asked me to give it to you when the time came." My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in my grandfather's careful, familiar handwriting. "Dear Anna, if you're reading this, then you've done what I always knew you could do. You've made something of yourself, despite everything they've thrown at you. I'm proud of you. Even though I won't be there to tell you in person, I know your parents have made your life difficult. I've watched them favor your sister, watched them tear you down whenever you tried to rise. It broke my heart, but I couldn't change them. All I could do was try to give you a foundation to build on. This money isn't a solution to all your problems, but it's a start. Use it wisely. Build the life you deserve. And remember, you are worth more than they will ever understand. There's one more thing I need you to know. I was planning to change my will completely to leave you half of everything. Half the properties, half my savings. You deserved it more than they did. But I ran out of time. Be careful, Anna. Your parents are not good people. They care more about money than anything else, even family. Don't let them destroy you. You're stronger than they are. Love always, Grandpa." Tears streamed down my face as I read the letter. He had wanted to give me more. He'd been planning to change his will to make sure I was truly taken care of, but he died before he could do it. My grandfather, he really loved me. "There's something you should know," Henry said gently, his voice pulling me back from my emotional daze. "The week before your grandfather died, your mother came to see me. She was asking questions about his will, about whether he'd made any recent changes. I didn't tell her anything, of course, attorney-client privilege. But she was very persistent, very concerned about the estate. A chill ran down my spine, a cold premonition. You think she knew he was planning to change the will? I can't say for certain, but the timing was suspicious. Your grandfather was in perfect health one week, and the next week he was dead. Heart failure, they said, but he just had a physical exam, and his doctor told him he had the heart of a man 20 years younger. My mind reeled. What are you saying? Henry leaned back in his chair, choosing his words carefully, his gaze steady. I'm saying that when someone stands to lose a significant inheritance, they might do things they wouldn't otherwise do. I'm saying that your grandfather's death was very convenient for your parents. And I'm saying that if you look closely at the circumstances, you might find some questions that were never properly answered. My mind was reeling. Was he suggesting what I thought he was suggesting? That my parents had something to do with my grandfather's death? I have no proof, Henry continued, as if reading my thoughts. Just an old lawyer's suspicions. But I thought you should know, especially now that you've gone up against them in court. They've shown you what they're capable of when their money is threatened. Imagine what they might do if the stakes were even higher. I left Henry's office in a daze, clutching the folder with the trust documents and my grandfather's letter. $60,000. It was enough to pay off the student loans I was still chipping away at. Enough to have a real emergency fund. Enough to finally breathe. But all I could think about were Henry's words. Your grandfather's death was very convenient for your parents. I drove straight to the public library and spent the next 3 hours digging through old newspaper archives. I found my grandfather's obituary brief and respectful. Died peacefully at home, surrounded by family. But there was another article, smaller, from a week later. A letter to the editor from my grandfather's longtime physician, Dr. Russell Hayes, expressing shock at the sudden death of a patient he'd just examined and declared healthy. I found Dr. Hayes' contact information and called his office. He'd retired 5 years ago, but the receptionist gave me his home number. When I called, he answered on the third ring. Dr. Hayes, my name is Anna Thompson. I'm calling about my grandfather, James Thompson. You were his doctor. There was a pause on the other end, long and heavy. James Thompson. Yes, I remember him. A good man. His death was such a shock. Can I ask you something? My voice was barely a whisper. You wrote a letter to the newspaper saying you were surprised by his death. Why? Another pause. Longer this time. Are you asking as his granddaughter or in some other capacity? I'm an attorney, I said, my voice gaining strength. And I have reason to believe there might have been something suspicious about his death. Meet me at Elmwood Park in an hour, Dr. Hayes said, his voice low. There's something you need to know. Dr. Hayes was sitting on a bench near the pond when I arrived, feeding breadcrumbs to the ducks. He was in his 80s now, with stooped shoulders and liver-spotted hands, but his eyes were sharp and alert. Thank you for meeting me, I said, sitting beside him. He didn't look at me, just kept tossing breadcrumbs to the eager ducks. I've carried this guilt for 12 years. Maybe it's time to let it go. What guilt? I pressed, my heart hammering. Your grandfather came to see me 2 days before he died. He was concerned about some symptoms he'd been having. Nausea, dizziness, tingling in his extremities. I ran some tests, but the results wouldn't be back for a week. I told him it was probably nothing. Maybe a virus. I sent him home. What were the test results? I asked, my breath catching in my throat. They showed elevated levels of dioxin in his blood. Dioxin is a heart medication, but your grandfather wasn't taking any heart medication. The levels were high enough to cause arrhythmia. Heart failure. High enough to kill someone. My breath caught. You're saying he was poisoned? I'm saying that someone gave him dioxin, probably in his food or drink over several days. By the time the test results came back, he was already dead. I went to the police, but they said there wasn't enough evidence to open an investigation. The medical examiner ruled it natural causes, heart failure. They said the dioxin in his system could have been a false positive, or residue from some other medication. Without an autopsy showing clear poisoning, they wouldn't pursue it. Why didn't you push harder? The words were out before I could stop them, laced with a mix of anger and desperate confusion. Dr. Hayes finally looked at me, and I saw shame, deep and agonizing, in his eyes. Your father came to see me. He said the family wanted to remember James peacefully, without the trauma of an investigation. He said it would destroy your grandmother to think someone had hurt him. And he offered me money, a lot of money, to let it go, to accept the medical examiner's ruling and move on. You took the money, I stated, not a question, but a raw accusation. To my eternal shame, yes. I was 3 years from retirement, and my wife had just been diagnosed with cancer. We needed the money for her treatment. So I told myself it was probably nothing, that I was seeing conspiracies where there were none. I let them bury your grandfather without answers. I felt sick, a wave of nausea washing over me. My father had bribed Dr. Hayes to stay quiet about evidence of poisoning, which meant he knew exactly what had killed my grandfather. Which meant he'd either done it himself or helped cover it up. The thought was monstrous, but it fit. Dr. Hayes, would you be willing to testify to this? To put it in a sworn statement? He nodded slowly, a newfound resolve in his old eyes. Yes, I'm old now, and my wife passed away 5 years ago. I don't need their blood money anymore, and I don't want to die carrying this secret. If you're going after them, I'll help you. I got Dr. Hayes' statement recorded and notarized that same afternoon. Then I went straight to the district attorney's office. The DA, a sharp woman named Catherine Morris, listened to everything I had to say, her expression growing graver with each word. She looked at the documents, read Dr. Hayes' statement, and leaned back in her chair, a deep frown creasing her brow. "This is serious," she said, her voice heavy. "If what you're saying is true, we're looking at murder. But it's been 12 years. Physical evidence will be long gone. We'd need more than just elevated dioxin levels and a doctor's suspicions." "What about motive?" I asked, pushing the narrative. My grandfather was about to change his will. My parents stood to lose millions if he did. Henry Bradford, his attorney, can testify that my mother was asking questions about the will right before he died. That's circumstantial. We need something concrete. Bank records showing they were in financial trouble. Proof they purchased dioxin. Witnesses who saw them administering it. Something. I left the DA's office feeling frustrated. I had enough to raise suspicions, but not enough to prove anything. My parents had covered their tracks well. But then I remembered something. When I was younger, before everything fell apart, my mother kept meticulous records of everything. She had files for every receipt, every bill, every transaction. She was obsessed with documentation, with having proof of everything. And if she was that obsessive 12 years ago, I called Melissa. We hadn't spoken since the courthouse, and I wasn't sure she'd answer, but she did, on the 4th ring. "Anna," she said quietly, her voice tentative. "Melissa, I need your help with something." "I can't. Mom and Dad are furious about the court case. They've forbidden me to talk to you." Her voice was laced with fear. "Melissa, I think they killed Grandpa." Silence on the other end. A long, agonizing silence. Then a shaky whisper. "What? I told her everything. The trust fund, Henry's suspicions, Dr. Hayes' statement about the dioxin poisoning. I told her about my grandfather's plans to change his will, about my mother's suspicious visit to Henry's office, about the bribe to Dr. Hayes." "That's impossible," Melissa said, but her voice wavered, a tremor of doubt. "They wouldn't. They couldn't." "They put a child's health at risk to save money on repairs," I said, my voice hardening. "They threw me out onto the street when I was 19. They sued me for emotional distress when I stood up to them. What makes you think they're above murder? But Grandpa, he was their father. He was also worth $2 million, and they were about to lose half of it." Melissa was quiet for a long, heavy moment. Then she said, her voice barely audible, "What do you need from me?" "Mom keeps records, right? Financial documents, receipts, everything. Does she still have files from 12 years ago?" "Yes," Melissa confirmed, a note of bewilderment in her voice. "She keeps everything in the storage room in the basement. It's all organized by year. I need you to look for anything from the months before Grandpa died. Bank statements, credit card bills, pharmacy receipts, anything that might show they were in financial trouble or that they purchased dioxin. Anna, I can't just go through their private files." The panic was clear in her voice. "Yes, you can," I insisted, a cold determination settling in my gut. "Because if I'm right, they murdered our grandfather for money. And they've spent the last 12 years living off that blood money while letting everyone think he died naturally. Don't you want to know the truth?" Another long silence stretched between us, fraught with unspoken fears and dawning horror. Then a tiny, resolute whisper. "I'll look." "But Anna, if I find something, if this is real, what happens to them?" "They go to prison," I said simply, the words feeling stark and immutable. "For the rest of their lives." "And what happens to me?" Her voice was fragile. I didn't have an answer for that because if my parents went to prison for murder, Melissa, the golden child, the favorite, the one they'd spent their lives protecting and spoiling, would be left with nothing. No family, no support, no illusions left about who her parents really were. "I'm sorry," I said finally, the words heavy with a truth I knew would be painful. "But the truth matters more than comfort." "I'll call you tomorrow," Melissa said and hung up. I sat in my car outside the DA's office, staring at my phone. I had just asked my sister to betray our parents, to help me send them to prison. Part of me felt guilty about it. But a larger part felt nothing but cold, hard determination. Because if they'd really killed my grandfather, they deserved whatever happened to them. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on work. I kept imagining what Melissa might find, kept playing out scenarios in my head. What if there was proof? What if there wasn't? What if Melissa changed her mind and told our parents what I was doing? But the next evening, Melissa called. I found something, she said, her voice shaking, barely above a whisper. Anna, I found something bad. We met at a coffee shop on the edge of town, far from anywhere our parents might see us. Melissa looked terrible, pale and hollow-eyed, like she hadn't slept either. She sat across from me and slid a folder across the table with trembling hands. I went through everything, she said, her eyes fixed on the table. Bank statements, credit card bills, all of it. And I found these. I opened the folder. Inside were copies of credit card statements from the 3 months before my grandfather died. There were charges to pharmacies, medical supply companies, online retailers. Melissa had highlighted several entries in yellow. This one, she pointed with a shaky finger to a charge from an online pharmacy, is for Digitalis purpurea seeds. That's foxglove. It contains dioxin naturally. You can extract it if you know how. My heart pounded, a frantic drum against my ribs. They bought the poison. That's not all. She pulled out more papers. Look at these bank statements. 2 months before Grandpa died, their checking account was overdrawn by $30,000. They had maxed out 3 credit cards. They were drowning in debt. I stared at the numbers. My parents had been nearly bankrupt. They'd made bad investments, overspent, and run themselves into a financial hole. And then, conveniently, my grandfather died. And they inherited everything. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. There's more, Melissa said quietly, her voice choked. She pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. I found this hidden in Mom's desk drawer. It's her handwriting. I opened the notebook. The first few pages were ordinary, grocery lists, appointment reminders, nothing unusual. But then I found a page dated 3 weeks before my grandfather's death. Jay says he's changing the will. Giving half to Anna. Can't let that happen. We'll lose everything. Need to act fast. My hand shook as I turned the page. Research shows dioxin hard to detect. Natural compound could look like heart failure. Jay takes tea every morning. Easy to add to tea. The next entries were dosage calculations. Research notes about how much dioxin would be needed to cause heart failure without being immediately obvious. The final entry was dated the day after my grandfather died. It's done. Doctor said heart failure. No one suspects. We're safe. Properties are ours. I looked up at Melissa and she was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. She killed him, Melissa whispered, the words ragged. Mom killed Grandpa. She planned it. She researched it. She did it. And Dad must have known. He helped cover it up. I carefully photographed every page with my phone, then looked at Melissa, my own eyes burning. Are you willing to testify to where you found these? To confirm this is your mother's handwriting? She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I have to. I can't protect them anymore. Not after this. Grandpa was good to us. He loved us. And they killed him for money. Melissa, once we take this to the police, there's no going back. They'll be arrested. They'll go to trial. Everything will come out. I know. Her voice was small but steady, full of a newfound strength. But it's the right thing to do. You taught me that in the courtroom when you stood up for Claire. You showed me what it means to do the right thing even when it's hard. Even when it costs you something. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand, a silent promise. Thank you. I know this isn't easy. Nothing about this is easy, she said, a fragile smile touching her lips. But Grandpa deserves justice, and you deserved better than what they did to you. Her eyes met mine, brimming with sincerity. I'm sorry it took me so long to see that. We went to the police station together. Catherine Morris, the DA, was called in even though it was after hours. We laid out everything. The trust fund, Dr. Hayes' statement, the financial records, the notebook. Catherine's expression grew darker, grim with each piece of evidence. This is enough, she said, her voice sharp with a chilling satisfaction. Finally, we can get a warrant. We'll arrest them tonight. Tonight? Melissa's voice cracked, suddenly realizing the finality of it all. The longer we wait, the more chance they have to destroy evidence or flee, Catherine explained, her gaze firm. If they realize what's happening, they might run. We need to move fast. 2 hours later, I sat in Catherine's office, Melissa beside me, gripping my hand so tightly it hurt. We watched through a monitor as police officers arrived at my parents' house. We watched our mother answer the door in her expensive robe, her face changing from confusion to horror as the officers read her rights. We watched our father try to bluster his way out of it, watched him be handcuffed and led to a patrol car, his pride utterly shattered. "It's real," Melissa whispered, her voice raw with shock and sorrow. "It's really happening." I felt numb. All those years of being told I was worthless, of being thrown away like garbage, it all came from people who were capable of murder. People who had killed a kind old man because he wanted to make sure I was taken care of. The irony was a bitter, cold taste in my mouth. The arraignment was set for the next morning. Catherine had enough evidence for charges of first-degree murder, evidence tampering, and fraud. The bail was set at $2 million, exactly the amount they'd received from my grandfather's life insurance policy. They couldn't pay it. They'd spent most of the money already, and their assets were frozen pending investigation. My parents would sit in jail, awaiting trial, their comfortable, respectable lives utterly shattered. The news spread fast. Within 24 hours, every local station was covering the story. Prominent landlords arrested for murder. Woman discovers parents killed grandfather. 12-year-old murder case reopened. My face was everywhere, and so was Melissa's. The press painted me as the heroic daughter who uncovered the truth and painted my parents as monsters who'd literally gotten away with murder for over a decade. The firm where I worked was flooded with calls. Some were from former tenants of my parents, wanting to share their own stories of abuse and negligence. Others were from attorneys offering support. A few were from news outlets wanting interviews. But one call stood out. It came 3 days after my parents' arrest, from a lawyer representing Claire, the tenant I defended in court. "Anna, you need to know something," the lawyer said, his voice grave. "After your parents were arrested, 3 other tenants came forward. They all had similar stories, unsafe conditions, threats, intimidation. But one of them, a man named Thomas, said your father threatened him last year. Told him if he didn't drop his complaints about a broken furnace, he'd end up like your grandfather." I gasped, the implications chilling. Thomas thought it was just a figure of speech, but now it sounds like a confession, the lawyer finished for me. Exactly. Thomas is willing to testify. This could strengthen the prosecution's case even more. I thanked the lawyer and hung up, my hand shaking. My father had practically admitted to murder, had used my grandfather's death as a threat. The arrogance of it, the absolute certainty that they'd gotten away with it and would never be caught. It made me sick. That evening, Melissa and I met at my apartment. She'd moved out of our parents' house, was staying with a friend while she figured out her next steps. She looked lost and broken, but there was something else in her eyes, too, a kind of clarity she'd never had before. "I keep thinking about all the signs I missed," she said, her voice heavy with regret. Or maybe didn't want to see. The way they talked about Grandpa after he died, like they were relieved more than sad. The way they spent money so freely right after the inheritance came through. How they always discouraged me from asking questions about his death. "You were young," I said, my heart aching for her. "And they were your parents. You trusted them." "I shouldn't have," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I should have questioned things. Should have stood up for you when they kicked you out. Should have done a lot of things differently." She looked at me, raw emotion in her gaze. "Can you forgive me?" "There's nothing to forgive," I said, reaching for her hand. "You were caught in their web too, just in a different way. They manipulated you, used you. But you broke free. That's what matters," she nodded, wiping her eyes. "What happens now? Now we wait for trial. We testify. We make sure they never hurt anyone else again. And after that?" I thought about it. After the trial, after justice was served, what would be left? Melissa and I would have each other, but we'd never have a family the way other people did. We'd never have parents we could trust. Holidays without ghosts, a past we could look back on without flinching. But maybe that was okay. Maybe we could build something new, something better. Maybe we could be the family we'd never had. After that, I said, a faint smile touching my lips, we figure out how to move forward together. Melissa smiled back, a fragile but genuine smile. "Together," she repeated, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Outside my apartment window, the sun was setting over Omaha. Tomorrow would bring more headlines, more questions, more pain to process. But tonight, sitting with my sister, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt like maybe finally things were going to be okay. The trial began 6 months later in a courtroom packed with reporters, former tenants, and curious onlookers. I sat in the front row with Melissa, both of us dressed in dark, conservative suits. Across the aisle, my parents sat with their attorney, a desperate-looking man named Frank, who'd taken their case because no one else would. My mother looked nothing like the polished woman who'd walked into the courthouse 6 months ago. Her hair had gone gray, her expensive clothes replaced with an orange jumpsuit. She'd aged a decade in jail. My father sat hunched beside her, defeated before the trial even started, his bluster gone. Judge Holbrook presided, the same judge who'd ruled in Claire's favor. When she saw me, she gave a slight nod of acknowledgement. I nodded back, a silent communion of understanding. The prosecution's case was devastating. Catherine Morris laid out the evidence piece by piece, building an undeniable narrative of greed, premeditation, and murder. She presented the financial records showing my parents' desperate situation. She showed the notebook with my mother's meticulous handwriting, her chilling research into dioxin, her cold calculation of dosages and methods. Dr. Hayes testified about the elevated dioxin levels, about my father's bribe to keep him quiet. His voice shook as he admitted his complicity, as he apologized for staying silent for so long. Several jurors wiped their eyes as he spoke. Henry Bradford, my grandfather's attorney, testified about my mother's suspicious visit, about her questions regarding the will. He explained how my grandfather had planned to change everything, to give me half his estate, to ensure I was protected. He read my grandfather's final wishes aloud, and my throat tightened, hearing those words again, so full of love and foresight. Thomas, the former tenant, took the stand and recounted my father's chilling threat. He said if I didn't shut up about the furnace, I'd end up like his father-in-law. I thought he was just being dramatic. Now I know he was confessing. When it was time for Melissa to testify, she walked to the stand with her head held high, a fragile but unyielding strength emanating from her. She looked directly at our parents as she swore to tell the truth. "Please describe what you found in your mother's desk," Catherine said, her voice gentle. Melissa's voice was steady, clear for the entire courtroom to hear. "I found a notebook in her handwriting. It detailed plans to poison my grandfather with dioxin extracted from foxglove seeds. It included dosage calculations and notes about how to administer it without detection. The final entry stated that it was done, that he died as planned, and that they were safe." My mother's attorney tried to object, tried to claim the notebook could have been planted or forged. But handwriting experts had already confirmed it was my mother's writing. There was no disputing it. "Why did you come forward with this evidence?" Catherine asked, her gaze warm. Melissa looked at me, then back at the jury, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Because my grandfather was a good man who loved us. He didn't deserve to die for money. And my sister didn't deserve to be thrown away like garbage because our parents were greedy. The truth matters more than protecting people who don't deserve protection." My mother started crying then, loud, theatrical sobs, but no one in that courtroom had sympathy for her. The jury's faces were stone. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand feeling strangely calm. I'd been preparing for this moment for months, perhaps my whole life. But now that it was here, I felt detached, like I was watching myself from a distance. Catherine asked me to describe my relationship with my parents, and I told the truth. All of it. The favoritism, the emotional abuse, the day they threw me out, the years of homelessness and struggle, the way they tried to destroy my career when I dared to stand up to them. "Why do you think they treated you this way?" Catherine asked, her voice soft. "Because I represented something they couldn't control," I said, my voice steady. "Because my grandfather loved me and they couldn't stand that. Because if they acknowledged my worth, they'd have to confront their own cruelty. It was easier to pretend I was worthless than to admit they'd failed as parents." My mother's attorney cross-examined me, trying to paint me as vindictive, as someone with an axe to grind. "Isn't it true that you've hated your parents for years? That you've wanted revenge since they kicked you out?" "I didn't hate them," I said, my voice calm, unwavering. "I was hurt. There's a difference. And I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice for their tenant, for my grandfather, for all the people they'd hurt. If that happened to bring consequences down on them, that's because of their choices, not mine. But you benefit from this, don't you?" He pressed, trying to imply a selfish motive. "If they're convicted, you inherit everything." "I don't want their money," I said, my voice ringing with absolute truth. And I meant it. I never did. I built my own life without them. The inheritance can go to their victims, the tenants they abused, the people they hurt. I just want them held accountable. The prosecution rested, and Frank tried to mount a defense. He called character witnesses who testified that my parents were upstanding citizens, generous donors to charity, pillars of the community. But it all rang hollow against the mountain of evidence. When my mother took the stand in her own defense, she claimed the notebook was just dark fiction, that she'd been writing a crime novel, and those were story notes. No one believed her. Her lies were transparent, desperate. The trial lasted 3 weeks. When closing arguments came, Catherine stood before the jury and said simply, her voice clear and powerful, "They murdered a kind man in cold blood for money. They poisoned him slowly, watched him suffer, and felt no remorse. They've spent 12 years living off blood money while his granddaughter slept in her car. Justice demands a verdict of guilty." The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood. "On the count of first-degree murder, how do you find?" "Guilty." My mother collapsed, wailing, a raw sound of anguish. My father sat motionless, staring at nothing, a broken man. "On the count of evidence tampering, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the count of fraud?" "Guilty." Judge Holbrook set sentencing for 2 weeks later. As the bailiffs led my parents away, my mother turned and looked at me. There was hate in her eyes, pure and undiluted, a terrifying testament to her unrepentant nature. I looked back at her and felt nothing, just a vast empty space where anger and hurt used to be. Sentencing day arrived, cold and gray, matching the somber mood in the courtroom. Judge Holbrook looked down at my parents with an expression of profound disappointment. "I've been on the bench for 27 years, she said, her voice resonating with authority. "I've seen every kind of crime, every kind of criminal, but what you did stands out for its sheer callousness. You murdered your own father, your children's grandfather, for money. You calculated the dosage, administered the poison, and watched him die. And then you spent 12 years living comfortably off his estate while your daughter, the one he wanted to protect, struggled to survive." My mother tried to speak, but Judge Holbrook held up her hand, a gesture of absolute finality. "You had every advantage, money, education, opportunity, and you used all of it to hurt people. Your tenants lived in squalor while you collected rent. Your daughter was thrown out to fend for herself. And your father, a good man by all accounts, was murdered in his own home. The law requires me to sentence you, but I can tell you that no sentence will ever be enough for what you've done." She looked at the papers in front of her. "On the count of first-degree murder, I sentence you each to life in prison without the possibility of parole. On the counts of evidence, tampering, and fraud, I sentence you each to an additional 15 years to run consecutively. You will spend the rest of your lives behind bars, and that is far less than you deserve." The gavel came down with chilling finality. My mother screamed, a sound of pure anguish that echoed through the courtroom, tearing at the silence. My father sat silent, tears streaming down his face, completely broken. As they were led away, my mother turned to me one last time, her eyes burning with a desperate, futile rage. "I hope you're satisfied," she spat, her voice hoarse. "You've destroyed this family." "No," I said clearly, standing up so she could hear me, my voice ringing with conviction. "You destroyed this family when you chose money over people, when you chose greed over love. I just made sure everyone knew the truth." She was dragged away, still screaming, and the courtroom erupted in noise. Reporters shouted questions. Former tenants cheered, a cathartic release. Melissa grabbed my hand and squeezed it tight, her grip firm and true. Outside the courthouse, Catherine Morris held a press conference. Today, justice was served for James Thompson and for all the victims of Helen and Robert Thompson's greed. This case demonstrates that no one is above the law, that wealth and status cannot protect you when you commit crimes. I want to especially commend Anna Thompson and Melissa Thompson for their courage in coming forward, for choosing truth over family loyalty. Reporters turned to me, shoving microphones in my face. "How do you feel seeing your parents sentenced to life?" "Relieved," I said honestly, the word a quiet exhale. "Not happy, not triumphant, just relieved that they can't hurt anyone else." "Will you accept the inheritance?" Another asked. "No. Everything they have will go to a fund for their former tenants, the people they actually hurt and exploited. That's what my grandfather would have wanted." "What's next for you?" I thought about it, looking at the faces around me. The relieved tenants, the determined Melissa, the supportive Diane Kestrel standing silently in the background. I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing. Helping people who need legal representation but can't afford it. Making sure landlords are held accountable. trying to make the system work for people who usually get trampled by it. That night, Melissa and I went to my grandfather's grave. We hadn't been there together since the funeral 12 years ago. The headstone was simple. James Thompson, beloved father and grandfather, 1940 to 2013. "We got them, Grandpa," Melissa said softly, kneeling by the stone, her voice thick with emotion. "They're going to pay for what they did to you." I knelt beside her. "I'm sorry it took so long. I'm sorry you didn't get to see me become an attorney, didn't get to see me prove them wrong. But I hope you know I never forgot what you told me. That I was worth more than they said. You were right." We sat there for a while in silence, the cold wind rustling through the bare trees. Finally, Melissa spoke, her voice small. "What happens to us now? We're orphans in a way. No parents, no family except each other." "We build something new," I said, a profound certainty in my voice. "Something better. We become the family we never had." "I'd like that," she smiled, a real smile this time, fragile but genuine. "You know, I've been thinking about going back to school. Maybe becoming a paralegal, working with you at the firm." "Diane would love that," I said, my heart warming. "We're always short-staffed." "It's strange," Melissa mused, a reflective sadness in her tone. "I spent my whole life trying to be what they wanted, the perfect daughter, the obedient one. And it was all for nothing. They didn't really love me. They just loved that I was easy to control. They were incapable of real love," I said, a quiet sorrow in my voice. "That was their failing, not yours. And not mine. We deserved better parents. Grandpa knew that." We left flowers on the grave, violets his favorite. As we walked back to the car, I felt something shift inside me. The anger that had driven me for so long, the burning need for vindication, the desperate desire to prove myself. It was fading. Not gone entirely, but quieter now. Manageable. "Anna," Melissa said as we drove away, her voice sincere. "Thank you. For not giving up, for fighting, for showing me what courage looks like." "You showed courage too," I said, glancing at her. "Coming forward with that evidence, testifying against them, that took strength I'm not sure I would have had in your position." "We were both strong," she said, reaching for my hand. "Just in different ways. But we're stronger together," I smiled. "Yeah, we are." The road ahead was long, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't facing it alone, and that made all the difference. 3 months after the sentencing, I stood in the conference room at Kestrel and Associates, looking at the faces of 23 former tenants of my parents' properties. They'd all come at my invitation to learn about the restitution fund that had been established. "The court has ordered the liquidation of all assets belonging to Helen and Robert Thompson," I explained, my voice clear and firm. "The 3 rental properties have been sold, personal assets, investments, everything. After legal fees and court costs, there's approximately $1.8 million remaining. That money will be divided among all verified victims, tenants who suffered due to unsafe living conditions, people who paid medical bills because of their negligence, anyone who was harmed by their actions." Claire, the woman whose case had started everything, raised her hand. "How much will each person get?" "It depends on the severity of harm and documentation of damages," I answered. "But we estimate between $30,000 and $70,000 per person. Some will get more if they can prove significant medical expenses or ongoing health issues." A man in the back stood up. "That money should go to you, Anna. You're the one who brought them down. You sacrificed everything to get justice." I shook my head, a gentle smile on my face. "I didn't do this for money. I did it because it was right. This money belongs to the people they hurt. I have my grandfather's trust fund. That's more than enough." The meeting continued for another hour, with people sharing their stories, some crying, some hugging each other, a collective healing unfolding. These were people who'd been victimized and silenced, who thought no one cared about their suffering. Now they were being heard, being compensated, being vindicated. After everyone left, Diane came into the conference room, her eyes warm with pride. "That was a good thing you did, Anna. A lot of lawyers would have taken a hefty portion as fees." "I'm not interested in profiting from my parents' crimes," I said, stacking files. "Besides, I have enough. The trust fund paid off my loans and gave me a cushion. I don't need more." "Speaking of which," Diane said, a twinkle in her eye, "I have a proposition for you. I'm getting older, thinking about retirement in a few years. I'd like you to consider becoming a partner, eventually taking over the firm entirely. I stared at her, utterly stunned. Are you serious? Completely, she affirmed, her smile widening. You're the best attorney I've ever trained. You care about the clients. You fight like hell. And you understand what it's like to be powerless. This firm needs someone like that at the helm. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Diane chuckled. Think about it. We can discuss details later. That evening, I met Melissa for dinner at a quiet restaurant downtown. She'd started classes at the community college, working toward a paralegal certificate. She looked healthier than I'd seen her in years, with color in her cheeks and a new light in her eyes. How was your day? She asked, her smile genuine. Surreal, I admitted, swirling my water. I distributed almost $2 million to people our parents victimized, and Diane offered to make me a partner in the firm. Melissa's eyes widened. That's incredible. Are you going to accept? I think so. It feels right, like everything I went through led to this. Grandpa would be proud, she said softly, a wistful smile. You became exactly who he knew you could be. We ordered our food and talked about normal things, her classes, my cases, whether we should adopt a cat for my apartment. It felt strange and wonderful to have a normal conversation with my sister, to have a relationship not poisoned by our parents' manipulation. I saw them last week, Melissa said suddenly, her voice dropping. At the prison. I slowly put down my fork. Why would you do that? I needed closure, I guess. Needed to see them one more time. She took a shaky breath. Mom tried to guilt trip me. Said I'd betrayed the family. Dad just cried and said he was sorry. But neither of them actually took responsibility. Even now, even after everything, they can't admit they were wrong. Some people never do, I said, my voice gentle. They're too broken, too stuck in their choices. But that's not your burden to carry anymore. I know. She smiled, a quiet peace settling over her features. I'm not going back. That was goodbye for good this time. We finished dinner and walked through downtown Omaha, past the old courthouse where this had all started. I thought about that day 6 months ago, walking into that courtroom expecting nothing, only to change everything. I thought about my mother's disgust, my father's dismissal, the judge's surprise when she recognized me. I thought about how far I'd come from the 19-year-old sleeping in her car, from the girl told she'd never amount to anything. Do you ever wish things had been different? Melissa asked, her voice soft in the night air. That we'd had normal parents, a normal childhood? Sometimes, I admitted, looking up at the city lights. But then I think about who I became because of what I went through. The empathy I have for people who are struggling, the drive to fight for justice, the understanding that systemic problems hurt real people. Would I have that if I'd grown up comfortable and privileged? I don't know. So you're saying you're grateful for the trauma? Melissa raised an eyebrow, a wry smile. I laughed, a genuine, unburdened laugh. No, I'm saying I'm grateful for who I became in spite of it. There is a difference. We stopped at a coffee shop, the same one where Melissa had first shown me the chilling evidence of our grandfather's murder. So much had changed since that day. So much had been revealed, destroyed, rebuilt. I have something for you, Melissa said, pulling an envelope from her purse. I've been holding on to this. It's another letter from Grandpa. Henry Bradford gave it to me after the trial. He said Grandpa wanted you to have it when everything was settled. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope, my heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Dear Anna, if you're reading this, then you've uncovered the truth about my death. I suspected your parents might try something. I saw the way they looked at my estate, the calculations in their eyes. That's why I made sure to leave evidence, to give you tools to find justice if something happened to me. I'm so proud of you. Not just for your accomplishments, but for your character. You have a strength they'll never understand, a moral compass they lack entirely. Use it well. Help people who can't help themselves. Be the person I always knew you were. And remember, the best revenge is living well. Building a life they said you couldn't have. Becoming someone they said you could never be. You've already won, Anna. Everything else is just making sure they face consequences. You are loved. You are worthy. You are enough. Always. Grandpa tears streamed down my face as I finished reading, a profound, comforting warmth spreading through me. Melissa reached across the table and squeezed my hand. He knew, I whispered, my voice thick. He knew what they might do. And he still tried to protect me, even after death. He loved you, Melissa said, her voice soft but certain. Really loved you the way parents should. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my pocket, right over my heart. I'm going to keep fighting, I said, my resolve renewed. For people like Claire, like all those tenants, like everyone who gets trampled by people with power and money. That's how I'll honor him. And I'll help you, Melissa said, her eyes bright with purpose. Once I get my certificate, I'll be right there with you. We'll be a team. I smiled through my tears. A team? I like that. My parents spent their remaining years in separate prisons, their legacy one of greed, murder, and cruelty. My mother died of a stroke 4 years into her sentence, bitter and unrepentant until the end. My father lived longer, spending his days in the prison library, supposedly trying to understand where he'd gone wrong. But according to Melissa, who visited him once before his death, he never truly grasped it. He died believing he'd been unlucky, that he'd gotten caught rather than done wrong. Some people, I learned, are simply incapable of genuine remorse. The tenants they'd victimized used their restitution to rebuild their lives. Claire sent her daughter to college. Thomas finally got the medical treatment he needed, and 3 families were able to buy their first homes. Their suffering hadn't been erased, but at least it had been acknowledged and compensated. As for me, I became a partner at Kestrel and Associates and eventually took over when Diane retired. Melissa worked beside me, a brilliant paralegal who understood our clients because she'd felt powerless herself. We built something good from the ashes of our broken family. I never married, never had children of my own. My family was the people I helped, the justice I fought for, and the sister who'd found her courage when it mattered most. And sometimes, late at night in my office, I'd take out my grandfather's letters and remember that the best revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming everything they said you couldn't be, and using that success to help others they would have crushed. I'd built a life from nothing, proved my worth without their approval, and ensured they faced consequences for their crimes. In the end, that was victory enough. This story, my story, is a reminder that the truth has a way of finding its light, no matter how deep the shadows try to hide it. It's a testament to the fact that even when your own blood turns against you, you can find a family in unexpected places and a strength you never knew you had. Have you ever faced a betrayal that changed the course of your life? Or found the courage to stand up against injustice, even when it cost you everything? I really want to know. Tell me what you think in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to hear more tales of hidden truths and unexpected strength.